Hi, my name's Steve and welcome to the Seaside Allotment channel, and we're on a very windy site here. So I thought I'd just talk about few of the things that we do to mitigate the windy location. We're windy because we're by the seaside. The site's about a mile away from the beach. And yeah, I mean obviously, but you know, there are much windier places than here, but it's windy enough that we have to take some precautions, and wind just makes a massive difference to how happy plants are. Often the cold here is not so bad, but you know, leave a plant out and compare it to one that's sheltered from the wind, and you see a massive difference in the growth. And I don't think that's just the wind chill. I'm not sure exactly what it is, but it's a combination of the wind chill and just being battered around, basically. You know, plants just don't like it. So we do quite a lot here, and you know, I think we get reasonably good results as a result of it. So I'm going to show you around the different things that we do, and hopefully you can pick up some hints and tips and use them yourself, and maybe share some back with me. So let's have a look round. So I'm in the polytunnel right now, and straight away you can see that I've got big double doors at this end of the polytunnel, and I've also got big double doors at the other end. Now right now the wind is blowing on those doors, and so they're closed, just a little gap here, so I'm just getting some nice ventilation through here, but the runner bean is really nicely protected from the wind, and the cucumber in the corner is the same. And so having the option to close the doors at one end and leave them open at the other end is really key to us and the way that we grow. And pretty much almost all the time we find that we can leave one set of doors open and one set of doors closed, or one set cracked open and the other fully open. So the other thing we like to do is start things off in the polytunnel. So these French beans, for example, are obviously started in the polytunnel. They'll stay in here until June, and then they'll go outside. Of course, you know, if really bad winds threaten, they can always come back inside again. So the polytunnel's kind of acting as this temporary sheltered space to either get things started or protect things that might suffer in the event of really bad gales. So being able to move things in and out makes a lot of sense. Then outside the polytunnel I've got this little area here, and this is generally sheltered from the prevailing wind. And so when I bring the French beans out here, they'll sit here in this corner, and they'll actually be tied to this water tank, and that just stops the beans blowing over. And I've also got some runner beans, and they will go in that corner, and they'll be tied to that water tank, and basically they get lots of shelter from the wind here, but also they get the support to make sure they don't get blown over. We have had them blown over before, that's why they're tied to the water tank. So these two cold frames don't have any lids on them, although obviously I could just move lids from other cold frames to put on them if I wanted to, but generally I don't do that because they get really good protection from the polytunnel itself. The wind is generally blowing in this direction, and so the polytunnel just provides a great natural shield. Well, maybe not that natural, but pre-existing shield from the wind. Even in winter I tend to leave these netted frames on. Reduces the light levels just a touch, but actually I find that the benefit from a wind shelter is much more important than the extra light. And yeah, it's quite noticeable to see the difference between a plant that's outside, say down here, and one that's inside this. Even this relatively coarse netting does provide quite a significant amount of protection from the worst of the wind, as well as things like hail and snow and the like. By far the biggest benefit comes from actually having protection like this cold frame, and plants just absolutely love it in the environment that's created. Even on these low chocks you're getting quite a good level of ventilation, but obviously we can just put these bigger chocks in here, and then they get in a fantastic degree of protection, but also fantastic light levels, because the light is coming in from this side and the wind is coming in from this side. So it's a really great microclimate that gets created in the coal frames. And we get an even better microclimate created in these little low tunnels. We've got peppers in here at the moment, and obviously peppers really need that shelter. They need the heat, they need the sun, but they definitely don't want to be battered by the wind all the time. So I also have these deep coal frames, and these are perfect for things like the sweet corn, which is doing beautifully in here. But even things like lettuce absolutely thrive in this. They're getting a tremendous amount of protection from the wind, from that high back of the coal frame. And as I've mentioned before, just fantastic amounts of light coming in from the side and the top. And I also like to use a mesh. This is one of my favourites. This just provides some protection from the wind and also from the cold. And it's interesting, for example, to compare the onions in this bed, which are about 25% bigger than the ones that were just left outside. So I'm really happy with these, even though, because I've got the nets on, I've not been weeding them. And these field beans provide a good illustration as well. These field beans here have been underneath this net for most of their lives, whereas these field beans have been exposed to the elements, and you get quite a nice contrast between the two. So one of the other benefits of wind protection is that it reduces evaporation considerably from the ground. You know, the wind blowing over bare soil really does evaporate water out of that soil at a phenomenal rate. And so we put a really thick mulch of this loose, fluffy mushroom compost over the soil, and that significantly reduces evaporation, but also closing the coal frame lid does the same. So back at the polytunnel, one thing I really like is sliding doors. They make such a difference in a windy environment. Basically the wind is always just pushing the door closed, you know, up against the rigid frame of the polytunnel, and so it's really secure. There's no flapping door. And of course what I do is I drill holes in the paving slab at the entrance here, and that means I can just adjust the door to any position that I want. So we also try and make sure that if we're growing anything that's really quite tall, that's going to need some support, that we grow that near to a fence, so that we can use the fence to wrap string around to support it. We make sure that all of our beam frames are really well braced. Things like the broad beans, again, we grow those up against a fence, partly for the shelter from the wind, but also, again, partly so we can loop rope around to stop them blowing over. Just makes it really easy to support them. We also like to use fence pins to support all the brassicas, for example. So when we put a brassica frame up, the nets are providing some shelter from the wind when the plants are young. When we take that net off in July, early August time, all of the fence pins that we use to build the brassica frame get repurposed to support all the brassicas inside the frame, because they're about that sort of height then. They really need some support, so colettes and sprouts and kales and things like that. Things like sweet corn that we're growing in the polytunnel at the moment, they love being out of the wind. They just romp away in here. But when we move them outside, which we'll do in about 6 weeks' time, it's lovely. They love that environment then outside. But again, we'll make sure that we've got a big cane kind of stuck down the centre of them to support them. So I think that's all my hints and tips for today. If you've got any to share back with me, that would be great. My name's Steve. This is the Seaside Allotment channel. I'll see you soon.